All right, today what I want to talk about is inflation. We're finally having some downturn on the market because people are worried about the Federal Reserve having to once again still combat inflation. If you're wondering what inflation is all about, why the Federal Reserve is all up in arms, what you can do is go to a website called the BLS. That is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a government website where they get and collect all this information that allows us to track inflation. And what you want to do is go to bls.gov, then type in CPI. That's the Consumer Price Index. Then you'll click on this first link here and you'll get a lot of information. We're most concerned about these interactive charts right here. So you want to click on CPI data and then go down to interactive charts. So what you're going to see here is the most recent Federal Reserve, the most recent information that's been collected about inflation. So this is your overall inflation. And then you'll see here with food, with energy, and with all items minus food and energy, you can see what's driving that. So what's key here is that as I hover my cursor right here, we see that inflation is 8.5% for all categories as recent as July of 2022. That's significant because in the previous inflation read, they had it at about 9.1. So what's been driving the market upward is the thinking that inflation has peaked because the most recent reading is lower than the one back in June. Now, if you take a different look at inflation, there's a lot of good information here. The one we want to look at is inflation over the past 20 years. So when you look at inflation over the past 20 years, you begin to kind of understand the magnitude of what's going on right now. So this is going back again 20 years. And what the Federal Reserve wants to do is keep inflation at about 2% or less. Really, they want to keep it at 2%, a good, healthy rate of inflation. So you'll see here coming after the dot-com bubble burst in late 02, well, it burst in 2000, kind of bottomed out in 2002. You'll see here where inflation is kind of staying around that target. It gets a little high in 05. As we head into that real estate bubble, and then starts to come down back to normal, but then gets really high as that energy prices heat up. We had something called peak oil, and we had those housing prices all driving inflation to a fairly high valuation of 5.6. Now, you'll see here that inflation went down, and we'll talk about why that was. So it went from 5.6 down to a negative 2% inflation. And that set the stage to kind of take us through this nice scenario where we didn't have inflation too hot or too cold. And then it went down again here in 2020. We'll talk about why that is. And then it kind of ratchets up really high to where we are today. You'll see that 9.1 right there. That's what we believe to be the peak. And I should say we as the general public. And then you have that 8.5. Now, what you'll see here, what's instructive here is these gray columns. These gray columns represent recessions. So you'll see right here where they'll say the shaded area represents recessions. Now, what does that mean? When inflation has gotten really hot in the past, here it's at about over 5. It didn't get too hot here, but what's important is that it came down from about 2 to 0. When inflation has gotten hot in the last 20 years, it's been a recession that has driven it lower. And here we stand now at inflation at the highest it's ever been in 20 years. And the thinking right now is that, well, the Federal Reserve is not only going to bring it down, but they're going to bring it down without doing major rate hikes, and we're not going to have a recession. And that's why the stock market has been rallying for the last 6 to 8 weeks, is that they think we're going to have a perfect scenario where we don't need a recession or high interest rate hikes to bring inflation down. Whether or not that's true is really up to the future to decide. But as you see by this chart, we've got all-time high inflation, and the only time we've brought inflation down significantly in the last 20 years has been the pandemic, where we shut all the businesses down and created a recession, or the housing bubble of 07-08, where things peaked and then everything crashed. So time will tell where this story goes, but now you know a little bit more about inflation and why markets are reacting to the Federal Reserve suddenly reawakening and taking inflation seriously. Thank you for watching this video.